Well, good morning. Thank you so much for coming back for a second day of our workshop. We have some fabulous speakers today. So we're going to even get started early. And we just want to talk about how we want to end all of this. We're listening to all of our speakers and having a discussion. So we want to make sure that by the end of today, our goal is for everyone to help us participate in creating some type of, I'm going to use the word lesson plan. It doesn't have to be formalized, but we want to be able to synthesize the collective knowledge of which there is a lot in this room into something that we can take forward. And so we're going to spend some time afterwards trying to do that, whether it is all as a group or in a couple groups. But so we want you to think about, again, how we might be able to take what we're learning and all of the wisdom and all of your expertise and experience in this room to help us move forward in something we can use to basically better education for our students here in South Africa. And so we want to start nice and early. So we can. And so we have two, yeah, do you want to?
I wanted to add something. We had an excursion on Wednesday with the conference down to the Zebra Planetarium. And Timba is not going to be here today, but he's going to give a Indigenous Knowledge presentation on Wednesday at 4 o'clock at the planetarium, and that's free. So if you want to meet us at 3:30 at the planetarium on Wednesday, you can have a free show. Okay. So I just wanted to put that out there.
And so we have Dr. Tedlock and Jarita Holbrook today, so they're going to start, and there's a handout, so if you haven't gotten one, I have a handout for you. And, hopefully we'll have some more great discussions. Here's a handout if you need. Oh, perfect.
Yeah, okay. Always say
Yeah, our topic right now for this morning is ethnoastronomy. There were two terms that were used early in the field, ethnoastronomy and archaeoastronomy, and now almost no one is using either of them anymore. They're using something known as cultural astronomy, and it incorporates both fields. So I'll start back with ethnoastronomy because that's where I began in the field. Ethnoastronomy is a combination of the knowledge of different ethnic groups and the way they do astronomy. And so that field was basically cultural anthropology and linguists who started that field. The archaeoastronomers were the archaeologists, and anthropology is a strange field in the United States in that it has a lot of archaeologists in it, a lot of linguists, a lot of cultural anthropologists, and a lot of biological anthropologists. It's a strange tradition. It's not at all comfortable, but it's what I was raised in and the way I got started. I'm so happy today that we're not doing the four-field approach anymore, particularly in the States. And because it was too much of a stretch to be expert in everything. So I basically dropped the whole biological part. I used to be up to date in that. I don't bother with it anymore, which is nice for me. Yeah, the biological part, or physical, sometimes it's called physical anthropology or biological anthropology, and that particular part has to do with human evolution, human beings, and everything. Medical anthropology, part of it spun off of biological anthropology, and it has to do with human health, human life expectancy, the human body, the human being. And that was always a big stretch for other people to try to stay up with that particular field because it's so specialized now and so complicated. The part that I'm in, I'm a linguist, trained linguist. I teach linguistic anthropology, I teach cognitive anthropology, that sort of thing. And I'm a cultural anthropologist. So what I do is I go into the field and I keep going into the field and keep trying to learn from people all over the world what their astronomy is or what their medical practices are. I also teach other medicine still. Okay, so ethnoastronomy it's the astronomies of the world, and it's all the different kinds of astronomies, all the different types of mathematics that are used. There's a field known as ethnomathematics, and ethnomathematics is the mathematical systems that are used throughout the world. When I first started, we were thinking that these systems were somehow not as sophisticated as real math or real astronomy, and we were wrong. They're just as sophisticated, and we today talk about knowledge systems, mathematics as a science, astronomy as a science, and the practices throughout the world as science and as knowledge systems. I'm much more comfortable with that than I was thinking that it was somehow different, maybe, or it was at the origin of these other fields. It was less developed or something of that sort. We were stupid. It's just as developed, and it's just different paths. Okay. So the first book I ever wrote is called Time in the Highland Maya, and it's from my work in Guatemala. We have a division when people talk about the Maya, highland versus lowland Maya. That's sort of, we're getting rid of that too. It's interesting how we keep getting rid of things. But I was trained that I worked with the highland Maya because I worked in Guatemala, and I worked at about 7,000 meters above sea level. So that's the highlands. And in fact, today I'm dressed the way I would be dressed most of the year in highland Guatemala because it's rainy, it's pine forest, it's not at all tropical. Where we are below the Maya, it's more tropical and it's quite different. Okay, so the highland Maya are a large group of the Maya, and they're in Mexico and they're in Guatemala, and they're corn farmers, among other things, but they're also merchants, and they love to travel the world. If you meet a highland Maya person, you get to know them. They may live in Chicago, they may live in San Francisco, they may live in Guatemala, in highland towns. They love to travel, they're very urbane. They don't like to stay at home. And they often speak very good English today. They didn't when I was doing my very earliest field work. The first year I went to the field was 1976, and I wrote my dissertation by 78. And then that got translated into this book that I'm passing around, which was first published in 82. This is the revised edition, which is 92. And I continue to go back and to learn and to interact, and Maya keep coming into my life. Wherever I'm living and working, all of a sudden, ding, ding, there's a Maya who's coming through town, who wants to talk or wants to know what I'm doing. So among ethnographers who work with living peoples, they learn to speak the language, and they learn to eat like a Maya, et cetera, et cetera. And it just never goes away. But then you go to other places. I've worked in Brazil, at the Carajá, and so you pick that up. You begin to learn that language and those people and their astronomy, and what happens to you is your head becomes like a UN or something. You've got all these different groups. I worked and lived in Nigeria, also in Morocco, and I've also worked in Mongolia, and that's very different. And sometimes I get interference. I'm thinking about the Maya, and suddenly I'm in Mongolia, which is my favorite place on earth to live. I love horses. The Mongolian steppe is gorgeous. And I really like Mongolians because they're very outgoing. They're very aggressive, assertive, both the men and the women. The Mayas are a little quieter. And I guess they were good for me when I was young, just getting started. But today, the Mongolians are just fabulous for me. Okay. And I love to mix up Mayas with Mongolians to introduce them, in my network of friends and so on. So that's an ethnographer. Some ethnographers work with one group of people their entire lives. Other ethnographers keep adding, keep going, but never forgetting. You never walk away, and you cannot walk away because they become your families. Okay, I have a handout that it's my handout is like 2 different pages, but yours is front back, okay? So I'll talk on the front page first, okay, which has the map of the Americas. It's truncated, it's not the whole American continent. But I wanted to bring to your attention something that I'm very involved in now, honoring indigenous knowledge in the Americas, and actually realizing that there's many, many knowledges, and the bird migration is my newest research, okay? And bird migration and patterns, and that's what this shows, is really major for Mayans, because while they use astronomy,
Quiet, Clive.
oh dear. Anyway, so this map, I have on it 2 bullseyes. You'll see what I mean by it's like a sort of a circle with a dot in the center. One is where the Highland Maya are that I work, Momostanango, okay, down there, and the other is up in the American Southwest, where both my husband and I have worked with the Zuni and other Pueblo people, Isleta, etc. Okay, so these show the Swainson's hawks in particular, but understand that with bird migration, it's never really one bird that flies. They fly north and south depending on the season. And these are flyways, and this gives you a sense of how many birds we're dealing with. And you notice that they funnel through Central America. It really comes down tight. And when they come through over a period of days in incredibly tight patterns. And these hawks have learned to soar, not on open like this, but like this or like this, because there's not enough room for them to soar in that way. And they've learned how to get the updrafts and how to go thousands of miles in just a few days. They're quite remarkable. And this was very helpful for me because I realized what was going on. Mayan farmers and people in the Southwest are waiting for the hawks to go over, or they have a sense for when the first thunderstorms will come. Because if you're planting corn, you want to get the very first set of thunderstorms when you've just planted. In other words, if you put your seeds in the ground, within 5 or 6 days, you pray that there's got to be rain. And you've got to be smart. You have to look, you have to smell. You can smell thunderstorms coming too. And you have to watch the hawks. And you have to have a sense for when they're going to come. Okay, so that is how you can put seasonality into patterns like calendars and watching the stars, okay? And then on the other side, or the second page in my handout, I've got the Southern Cross. And what's so interesting about the Southern Cross is this is a dark constellation. The Mayans have both the star-to-star constellations, like the cross, okay, southern, and they can see it, by the way, that where the Maya are, it's visible. It's the last sort of place the Highland Maya can see the Southern Cross. And they can also see this constellation. It's a hawk constellation. But it's a dark, it's a nebula, a dark nebula. And this is Gary Gosen and Urton and Billie Jean Isbell and a whole bunch of people have worked on these, what they call the dark constellations. And the Maya do have one that I know of, okay? It's this one, okay? Now, that's called the coal sack. And I know that several people in South America see it as a llama face, and various different things, but this is a hawk, okay? And this is, so I have here on this top handout, I've got a star-to-star constellation, and I've got a dark nebula. And then, and that's for the meridian at midnight in early April, so that's the spring migration. Down below, mid-October, I actually show 2 star-to-star constellations, okay? And one of them is Aquila, which that's a mistake. It's not really an eagle, it's a hawk. And why it's called Aquila, I don't know. Does anyone here know why that mistake has been made? No? Dennis, do you have any idea? Why they call it Aquila?
Must be a Greek mistake, right?
It's a Greek
Or a
mistake.
French one.
Oh,
French.
Oh.
They set the constellations in 1920, the IAU did.
Ah.
So it could be a French
20,
mistake.
Yeah, because I mean, it's very
Start there and then look back.
Yeah, it's very
1920 is easier.
1920, yeah, that, anyway, for some reason, and you'll see what's called the bent cross, which is in Sagittarius. You see that it's actually bent, it's not a simple up and down cross. And those are used in timing, and, you know, and what happens with the bent cross is when you see that, you rush up to your cornfield, and, you know, the corn grows in Guatemala about, 10 feet high, and then you bend it down, like the top third of it, you bend down. And what happens is that the juices go into the corn ears to force it to ripen. And this is how they get the corn to ripen when they want it to ripen. In other words, it's human intervention. So that's the other part. Now, what is interesting about this to me anyway, is I'm able to put together my interest in bird watching in the far north of the Americas with star-to-star constellations, with black nebula. I'm sure there are other dark constellations as well. I just haven't discovered them yet. You know? And there's nobody I know of who's been able to discover them, you know, among the Maya. But there'd be somebody, you know, somebody will come along and actually begin to fill out that part of the narrative. Okay, so that's my handout, and we can talk about it if you like, over coffee or anything like that.
I'll step in.
Okay.
Thank you for that. So, I also do ethnoastronomy, called ethnoastronomy. And unlike Barbara, I come from astrophysics. And so I was the astrophysicist in the applied anthropology department. And so I wanted to comment on some of the things that you said. This division about highland Maya versus lowland Maya, and that having to switch that division later on, right? And how she said we're just stupid, but we've been talking a lot here about indigenous knowledge. And, you know, what would that have been divided that way if somebody had asked the people, how do you divide yourselves? How do you consider yourselves in relation to those people? Or are they your cousins? And what are the relationships? So that was sort of a Western, it was a Western idea planted on the Maya people that then had to be revised later. Am I right?
Yes, that's a beautiful way to put it.
So again, when we're talking about using indigenous knowledge systems, or the ideas that come out of indigenous knowledge systems in our research, sometimes just ask, you know, just like
Talk to the people.
talk to the people.
They know more than you do.
Exactly, you're there to learn. And of course, you know, we're touching on the issue of cultural imperialism,
Yes.
right? That somehow, you know, especially with me, oh my God, she's an astrophysicist, oh my God, she must know so much. Well, and when I go into the field, I try to be an idiot unless somebody's being rude, right? So I don't necessarily say, I'm Jarita Holbrook, and, you know, I have a PhD in astrophysics from, you know, such and such a place and such a, you know, I just sort of sit there and I'm there to really learn and gather knowledge. So I try to, like, you know, be stupid in the field so that people will actually talk to me and teach me, right? And you know, they can actually, you know, people in the field can be very condescending as well. You know, especially with the gender issue and the fact that I appear to be a young woman. I am not a young woman. I appear to be a young woman, right? They always think I'm younger than I am, right? So, yeah, I'm sure you did too. But, you know, when you look at all of things that I've done in my life, you have to realize that I have to be quite older than I look, right? And so I appear to be younger, right? And of course I'm black. Right, so that all comes into play when I'm in the field, and people underestimate me, which is fine, because they just tell me anything. Oh my God, you know, they just like tell me anything because they think that I can't understand and can't process it. Right, so I get great data. I get great data. So yes, there's the downside. Everyone thinks I'm stupid and young, But the upside is that people are just forthcoming. They just tell me, right? So that whole cultural imperialism, that I'm an astrophysicist, I'm somehow more with it, right? I know the science behind it, and this is some quaint, tradition and all that stuff. It has to go out the window. It has to really go out the window. Because as someone who's walked on both sides of that line, that's why we're all sitting here, is because, South Africa has a huge investment in astrophysics, and it cannot connect to the people. Astrophysics is something that floats up there. It doesn't have any relevance to our everyday lives, except for it's really cool, and look at those pictures. Whereas the astronomy that you find in other cultures is relevant to their everyday lives. I'm going to look at this because it's going to tell me when I'm going to plant my corn, right? And I'm going to do this because, it's very, very relevant in some way. Or I'm going to make this piece of art because, Venus is really important and it has to do with women and fertility. Indigenous astronomy is entwined in their everyday lives in a way that astrophysics is not, right? And so that's why we're here, to try to make astrophysics and indigenous astronomy basically more relevant to people here in South Africa, to the students, so that we produce more astronomers to work at these wonderful facilities that are all being populated right now mostly by foreigners, right? So I wanted to add that comment. So about my field work, I study, so I'm an expert on African indigenous astronomy. But most of my work is either on astronomers or on navigators. So one of my field sites is the United States Naval Academy. So this is a different type of ethnography altogether. And I thought that us sitting next to each other would provide you with a nice contrast. We both are ethnoastronomers, right? I'm coming from the other tradition, learn how to be an ethnographer. I work in modern, sort of Western settings a lot of the time. And I rarely get a chance to go into what we call ethno or indigenous settings. So one of my field sites, when I did my navigation by the stars studies, I had 3 communities. Are you ready? Have you guys read about me? I mean, maybe you already know, so this might not be shocking. But my 3 field sites were the United States Naval Academy in Annapolis, Maryland, Mole Island in Fiji in the South Pacific, and the Kirkina Islands in North Africa and Tunisia. Those were my 3 field sites. And all 3 of them had communities of navigators, people who use the stars for navigation on the ocean, which is what I was looking for, navigators on the ocean. And I documented what stars they used, right? And they had commonalities. They told very similar stories about navigating on the ocean and using the stars, right? Even though they're all across the world, and what does a Mole Islander in Fiji know about the United States Naval Academy? Except for they also have a Naval Academy, right? And they also work, not only do they use their canoes, but they also work as merchant marines, right? And so there's no sort of purity, People think, oh, you're going to go into some community and somehow isolated in time and space forever. No, these people are circulating. And, I met people in Tunisia, the fishermen in Tunisia, who have been to Fiji as merchant marines and have been, of course, to the United States as merchant marines. And, so it's all this circulation. And I think it was important what you said about the Maya moving and circulating, because again, when you imagine, you have this imagining that people are isolated and they're not going to move. And they're not, it's like the, what do they call it, the anthropological present.
Yes.
Like that. Somehow you're capturing the moment in time, and that moment in time is never going to change, and people are never going to circulate. And so one of the moments that happened about 20 years in the United States is old-time anthropologists who are ethnographers used to go to like Highland Maya. Mm-hmm. They used to write their ethnographies, go back, they become professors at Harvard, mm-hmm. and they never have to interact with those people again. Now, the children of the people that are interviewed in their books are students at Harvard, right? And now everybody can get copies of the book. And so that book is now back in that community, circulated. So as part of the requirement for me doing field work in Fiji and the South Pacific, anything that I produce has to go back to the archives in Fiji and has to go back to the community. So they have copies of, you know, my articles that have come out. My book isn't published yet, but they have copies of them. And they're like, oh, look, there's a picture of me. Oh, I told that story, you know. So it's a different world for being an ethnographer than it was, you know, even 20 years ago. And this has ethical implications as well. And I think in Indigenous knowledge studies, I wasn't in this room, but there's huge ethical issues about collecting Indigenous knowledge from people and interacting with people. And here in South Africa, they insist that for every government grant that's for supporting Indigenous knowledge studies, that somebody who is an Indigenous knowledge specialist from the community be a co-I on the grant, right? So you have to, I can't just say I'm gonna go and study such and such a group over at Mahi King, right? It has to be me and somebody from Mahi King working together, right? So that's how they deal with some of these ethical and intellectual property issues, right? Is you have to partner with somebody. It's not like that in the U.S. You know, like I said, I told you how Fiji handled it. You must send all the publications, copies of the publications back. But it's something to think about. And I keep acting like you guys are going to go out and do research, you know. But this is things that we think about when we go out and do research. Does that stimulate something for you to say?
Yeah, well, I recognize everything that you're saying, and we're in a very much of a decolonization boom in the United States and Canada and other areas. So we're constantly thinking about what our ancestors did and the way we were trained and what we did early in our research and how are we going to change it now. And there's much more partnership than there ever was in the past. It's not required in the United States. I was in Amsterdam about 3 summers ago, and I was involved, and my husband was with me too. We were involved in helping the university to figure out where it was ethically. And we had no idea that Dutch anthropology was still high colonialism. We didn't know it, okay? And so we went there and we were talking to students and faculty and so forth, and discovered they go anywhere they want in the world. There's no PR, there's no boards that talk about ethics with you. You don't have to be cleared by anybody. And Dennis and I were sitting there, you know, shocked coming out of the United States and discovered, well, we've had these ethical boards for about 50 years in the United States. Now, they don't have real teeth, but yet they make you wake up and realize that you don't just go out there and do whatever you want. And we began to hear students presented, they were doing PhDs and master's degrees and whatnot. They'd never been to ethical boards, and they actually had research questions that you could never do in the United States. Never come home, never talk about them. You know, things about human sexuality that were shocking. You know, I sat there, you know, well, Amsterdam is a shocking place.
That's your Protestant roots.
Yes.
America is like so Protestant, so conservative in very odd ways.
Oh, very. And it affects you as a scholar.
Yes.
Anyway, so I was shocked in Amsterdam by almost everything, including the research that was
Hold
going
on
on.
1 second. Sadly, the button is on the left there. You have to push the button.
Yes, sir.
Yep, that one.
Oh, you get in and out of here. Yeah, anyway, so I was shocked, and that was good for me to be shocked and then to come back. And if you get, everybody just assumes that you have to go before an ethics board to explain your research, and you have to explain yourself to people, and you can't do any kind of research like they still do in psychology in the United States, where you actually mislead people, you lie to people to get what you want. You can't do that in anthropology anymore. You cannot deceive people. Deception is not okay. All right. So these people in Amsterdam, they were into deception, they were into everything, just boldly, and it was great for me to wake up and to say, okay, high colonialism does exist in some places in the world. I don't know where else it exists, It does exist, and they don't ask anyone any permission, and they don't work with Maya or with whoever they do. They don't learn the indigenous system themselves. You know, they're scientists, and they look down on the people they work with. And I saw this in young people, you know, and they're not trained to go into the field, or they have a different attitude, which is,
Well, you know, in Germany, they have that Max Planck Center for
Yeah.
Ethology,
Right. Right.
where they set up a camera like this,
Right.
pointed in one direction, but actually it's pointed at another direction.
It looks like it's pointed.
Looks like it's pointed to us, but it's actually pointed at some children or something, and it's documenting what they do in everyday life without their permission.
Yeah.
Right.
Well, that's another.
And that's another deceptive one.
Yeah, that's Germany, actually. That's the way education works in Germany. I was a student there for a while, I can tell you. And so there's a second tradition, second country, and it could be many, many other places that are like that. So we have made some improvements, and some, I think they're improvements, but there are some holdout traditions, and there always will be. And I don't quite know why. Anyway, so the field of ethnoastronomy is, I think, wonderful, and I really enjoy it. I really enjoy trying to look at the sky differently and trying to live differently, eat different food. That's very important.
So, just going off of what she said, that, no, I just had a brain blank. So now you know I'm old. With ethnoastronomy and sort of studying up, so my students are not astrophysicists, they're not. They're anthropologists, they're women and gender studies. So one of the other issues is that they're often studying people who have higher status. So this is also about the issue of imperialism. And that's the thought that I lost, that came back, okay? Which is that why do these people go out and do this, you know, colonialistic anthropology looking down? Is because it's easy. It's easy because people and their cultures are messy, right? And so it's so much easier to go in with your own ideas and just project them onto people because you have your nice theories and you know you only see the data that fits your theories and you can ignore all this other mess, right? And so, you know, it's very seductive to have something that's neat and tidy. And I can look at somebody's ethnography or somebody's data that's all neat and tidy and I'm like, it's a load of rubbish. And nothing is this neat and tidy. People do not get into boxes. They do not. People are complicated. And their culture is complicated. And their ethnoastronomy is complicated. And, you know, it's all these weavings together. And so in order to go into something like cultural astronomy, ethnoastronomy, you have to be okay with complexity. You have to not try to reduce things to simple answers. You know, it's going to be like, you're like, did she just start out with hawks? Right? You're like, what does astronomy? No. What does hawks have to do with ethnoastronomy? It's complicated. It's complicated. They're looking at the sky, but they're looking at the birds, and they're looking at the rain, and they're looking at the, you know, something else may grow just before the rain that they're looking at to see if it's growing before they plant the corn. And, you know, it's a complicated system.
And they're smelling.
And the smelling, right?
You can smell thunderstorms.
Yeah, well, you can, who cannot smell thunderstorms?
Oh, right, some pretty serious ones, yeah. Just you got north of it, and you can see it, it's not.
Yeah, and you know, I lived in Arizona in the United States, right, which is very dry. It's a dry heat, right, is this the slogan. And I was commuting, I was working at UCLA, so I was commuting across the desert, 9 hours, right, across the desert. Starting the Sonoran Desert, go through the Mojave Desert, and then out to Los Angeles. And about probably 100 miles from the ocean, I could smell it. Because I was so used to dry environment, and all of a sudden, 100 miles, I could smell. Oh, I rolled down the window, and I could smell that I was getting close to the ocean. It was still 100 miles away, so yeah, it can be done.
Yeah, I'm in New Mexico right now. It's where my husband's from and where we have a house. And this is a very wet summer. We have El Nino has come along, and we were in a very bad drought. And suddenly, I mean, I can smell thunderstorms. They just keep coming and coming. You know, and I think, Barbara, you're smelling some other thunderstorms. But no, I'm smelling them in the desert. And they're coming one after another after another. We're having one heck of a monsoon. Thank God. I mean, in New Mexico, we haven't had rain to speak of for 4 years. You know, and all of a sudden, it's just like every day I put on a raincoat.
But also that means the desert flowers are going to be really in bloom this year.
Exactly.
And that's what they said about here in the Karoo, that the wildflowers are going to be particularly good this year.
Yeah.
That we should go up there. I'm like, are you kidding me? Do I have time to go up to the Karoo and watch flowers? But, you know, if you get an invitation, see, this is the ethnographic part of it. You know, you're getting in with the community, and the community invites you to come up and see wildflowers, and what do? You go up and see wildflowers, right? Because that's part of studying a community and, you know, building rapport and relationships, So, questions. I think we pretty much covered a lot of ground there.
Must be interesting learning with the different groups of people and learning what they traditions and how they do things and stuff like that. Coming from a completely westernized, technological.
Yeah, but in both ways, both of us are colonized people, right? So I'm African American, part Native American, and you're part Native American too.
I'm a Ojibwe, and I didn't start by studying my own people. If I was studying today, I would study my own people first and then go elsewhere. But no, instead I went to the American Southwest, I went to Maya, I went to Mongolia, I went to Africa, 3 different African nations, you know, and that's what I did. Now it's time to return home, work with my own people, and that's what I'm turning to now, you know. But I was colonized. I was told that if I studied my own people, I'd become just a local yokel. That's what they call it, a local yokel. You know? So I had to study all these other people, you know, get involved in their lives. And so it's really interesting as I move back to Ojibwe and go back to Canada, to Saskatchewan, and actually figure out, all right, these are interesting people too. They have to be my people.
So I only make the point because, you know, we're very conscious of, in many ways, I have a bifurcated identity, right? So I'm American, but I'm also African American, right? And there's some instances where I'm treated like I'm an American, and then some things I'm treated like an African American. And so I empathize with any oppressed person because sometimes I am oppressed when I'm treated like an African American.
Or like a woman.
Or
That's
like a
woman.
Or
That's
like a
really
Native
bad.
American.
Or like a
Right.
Native American.
Yes.
A squaw.
So I think that for us as colonized bodies, that somehow it's easier for us to drop into other cultures. I don't know if you
Yeah,
find
it
that
is.
true.
Right. I found among my students, the ones that are natural researchers were from a colonized background and are mixed up. They're the naturals because they don't fit anywhere. So if you don't fit anywhere, you know, you can go anywhere. You know, I mean, whereas if you really fit where you belong, it's different. You know? So I've learned that some of my most talented students, they won't tell me right away what the background is, but I slowly figure out what the background really is. And they don't want to study it.
How they do.
Yeah, how they do their field work, what they choose to do, and they tend to be just natural field workers. You know, it's a very funny thing, and I've noticed that over the years. I'm also old, so.
Dwayne?
I wanted to ask about the sort of giving back you guys do when, because we have stuff we do in Australia, I imagine it's quite similar. We're talking about how whenever you work with community, you have to give back, you know, the books and the journal articles stuff. Do you do other things like educational materials, programs for schools and things like that as well, or is it just kind of various? Is there a certain requirement for that here?
I don't know here. I'll look at CV for that.
I mean, like you said, Jarita, I think for most of the, I'm not sure for astronomy, for most of astrophysics-based research, well, like trying to offer, there's a requirement for the research to communicate and develop materials for teachers and public and vendors. but I'm not sure in Canada. Because there is not in Fiji.
Yes, and I'm not sure it's, yeah, Mateo, I'm not sure if it's for IKS that you have, well, you're already embedded in some way for the IKS grants.
Yeah.
Some way you're already embedded, right? So yes, so he said that astrophysics grants, you have to have some component that gives back. And this is government money, NRF money, that they're talking
Well,
about.
what is it like back in the States?
Well, the people
So-
tend to, yeah, okay, I've worked at Zuni Pueblo in, it's on the far western part of the state of New Mexico, right on the border with Arizona, so the middle of both states, and that's, the Zunis have a very large reservation there, about 10,000 people. And they asked me, they said, well, you've been coming all these years, Dennis and I, you've been coming here all these, why did you come here, and what have you learned about us, and, you know, and could you write about that? So I wrote a whole book. It's called The Beautiful and the Dangerous, and it's all about the Zuni aesthetic system and how they live their lives and balance and various things about it and so forth and so on. And it was done for them because they demanded it. They wanted to know, why do you keep coming back? You know, what is it you're getting out of this? You know, and I thought, ooh, I've never told that story. So there's a lot of people now are actually writing about what is it that keeps luring them back, and how is your life connected to our life? And they want to know that very specifically. And I'm seeing this all over Canada and the U.S. And so they want to know about you. Why did you come here in the first place?
Yeah. So for my field site in Fiji, I'd say that the connections are tighter between me and my field site in Fiji than me and my field site in Tunisia, and of course me and my field site at the Naval Academy. So the Naval Academy wants me, I gave lectures while I was there, while I was doing field work at the Naval Academy. I gave lectures there, and they want me to come back. They wanted me to come back like 2 years ago and give another lecture, but I haven't had time to go back and give another lecture. The tighter connection in Fiji, they're on a remote island, and Fijians are very much into their, I hate the generalize, but they're communal, and what circulates, everything circulates through, so especially clothing. So the fact that, I'll have my white trousers on this year, and I come back next year and I still have my white trousers, that's really strange to them, that I haven't let those white trousers go. How can I still have my white trousers?
It's another pair of white trousers, isn't it?
Yes. And so what I found that they really wanted is discarded clothing, right? So for years I used to make a box, right? And just all the kids' clothes, and things, interesting things that, like nursing bras. When I had my children, I had the nice bras that unhook, for nursing. Oh my God, was that a hit? Old nursing bras. Wow, this is great. So I would make a box of clothing and then send it. And then one time, I made a box of clothing and I sent it, and the person who it was addressed to had moved. And so then they could not get the box because it had to be, they had to pay an extra fee to move it to the next place. So instead they sent it back to me. And so it went all the way to Fiji on a remote island and then all the way back. And I was like, okay, I have to just wait until I go to send them. But, I could send them a box of clothing today and they'd be like, yay. And then I'd see it, I may send it to Mode Island, but I may see my clothes in Suva, in the capital, 300 kilometers away, because it's circulated through their family, right? And, yeah.
You said in a box where you go.
When I went to Nigeria, in 2004. And before I went, I just went to the thrift store and I got a wardrobe from the thrift store. And then when I left it all there, right? They had made me Nigerian clothes. So I got like nice, Nigerian, I went home with Nigerian outfits and I left all those clothes that I had purchased for the trip.